Madeleine Albright, the first female U.S. Secretary of State, has died at the age of 84.
During the Clinton administration, Albright served as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations before becoming the nation's top diplomat. She championed the expansion of NATO and military intervention in the Balkans.
We have a questioner here. Gentleman in the white shirt, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for Secretary Albright. Why bomb Iraq when other countries have committed similar violations? Turkey, for example. Can I finish? For example, Turkey has bombed Kurdish citizens. Saudi Arabia has tortured political and religious dissidents. Why does the U.S. apply different standards of justice to these countries?
Let me say that when there are problems such as you have described, we point them out and make very clear our opposition to them. But there is no one that has done to his people or to his neighbors what Saddam Hussein has done, or what he is thinking about doing. I am very...
About Indonesia. Well, you've turned my microphone off.
That Saddam Hussein has produced weapons of mass destruction, which he's clearly not collecting for his own personal pleasure, but in order to use, and therefore he is qualitatively and quantitatively different from every brutal dictator that has appeared recently, and we are very concerned about him specifically and what his plans might be.
Thank you. My microphone is off. There we are. What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying... I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
shouting, just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
Sir, that you study carefully what American foreign policy is, what we have said exactly about the cases that you have mentioned. Every one of them have been pointed out. Every one of them we have clearly stated our policy on. And if you would like, as a former professor, I would be delighted to spend 50 minutes with you describing exactly what we are doing on those subjects.
Secretary Albright had already said she was willing to meet with some of you after the forum. Let's respect that. The more time you take shouting, the more time you take away from people who have questions. Secretary, I do have a brief follow-up, and that is on this point. There are many countries that have these biological and chemical weapons. 6 countries in the Middle East alone. You've stated why Saddam Hussein should be singled out, but it is puzzling to people to wonder why it's okay for these other countries to have biological and chemical weapons, but not him.
I think that it is clear that other countries have weapons of mass destruction. It is a question of whether there is a proclivity to use them. And Saddam Hussein is a repeat offender. And I think it is very important for us to make clear that the United States and the civilized world cannot deal with somebody who is willing to use those weapons of mass destruction on his own people, not to speak of his neighbors.
To punish Saddam Hussein for invading Kuwait and to make sure he doesn't do anything like that again or worse, the UN imposed sanctions on Iraq, the harshest, most comprehensive sanctions in modern times. Very little goes into the country. Virtually no oil goes out. The United States says there wouldn't be any sanctions at all if Saddam stopped lying about his destructive weapons and complied with UN demands. Meanwhile, it's no secret that the sanctions are causing hardships. It's not the leaders who are suffering, it's the people, and especially the children. This is a ward in a pediatric hospital in Baghdad for severely malnourished children. And everywhere we went, we saw children like these, malnourished, some close to starvation. We saw children who needed medicine they couldn't get. And this little boy died of pneumonia an hour after we took these pictures because there were no antibiotics. Jane Pierce works for the United Nations World Food Program.
Most people don't realize what's going on. They don't see pictures of babies like we've just seen here. You know, babies that are a third of their recommended weight.
Before 1990, before the war and before these sanctions, was this all unheard of in this country?
Yeah, yes.
Did not exist at all.
Didn't exist.
What's the problem? How come aid do not function?
Shortage of the spare parts.
Roger Normand, a human rights lawyer, was studying the water and sanitation plants that, like hospitals, used to have modern equipment.
Empty.
This empty, all of them empty.
But Iraq has not been allowed to import chlorine under the sanctions because it could be diverted to making chemical weapons. Before sanctions, Iraq was one of the most industrialized and westernized countries in the Middle East with a large middle class. But under the sanctions, Iraq has been forbidden to sell oil. So even though the sanctions would allow the country to buy food and medicine, Saddam Hussein claims they don't have enough money to buy them. But Madeleine Albright, the United States representative at the UN, says the sanctions haven't hurt him. She says the U.S. is trying to prevent Saddam Hussein from making and dropping a nuclear bomb or chemical weapons on other countries. And she says he's still lying about his weapons programs.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
The hunger crisis in Afghanistan has reached unparalleled proportions. 13,000 Afghan newborns have died from malnutrition this year alone, and over 3 million children are in dire need of nutritional support since January 2022. This is according to a report from the Human Rights Watch.
Acute hunger nearly doubled between last July and this month, and while the international community has offered humanitarian aid without a functioning central banking system in Afghanistan, there's not much that aid can do. What's more is about 95% of the country's population doesn't have enough food to eat, and over 3 million children are in need of nutritional support. And I was checking out the UN numbers, and it creeps up to 99% of households headed by women. So 99% of households in Afghanistan headed by women are facing acute hunger at this point.
We're just continuing the war, essentially. It's a different form of war now because we're saying we don't like the Taliban, we don't want them in power. I mean, look, they're in power, they're the government, it is what it is. If we're, you know, I mean, we beg the Saudis for help, and they don't, and they're also a monarchy. You know, it's not like a great democracy. So, you know, I get the Taliban.
They just executed dozens of people.
Right, exactly, exactly.
You know